Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I grew up living next door to my grandparents, which meant I spent a lot of time at their house, especially during summer breaks. My grandfather was always a difficult person to deal with, the kind who believes that age automatically equals wisdom, and that younger people's opinions don't matter. He had this frustrating habit of talking over me whenever I tried to say anything, and the only time he'd actually pay attention was when he thought I was wrong about something and wanted to correct me. I helped them maintain their garden during summers since I was about 14. The pay wasn't great, but my grandmother would always sneak me extra money when my grandfather wasn't looking, so I didn't mind too much. Plus, I got to spend time with her, even if it meant dealing with my grandfather's attitude. In their backyard, there was this old wooden sandbox my father had built for me when I was just learning to walk. By the time I was 17, it was practically falling apart. The wood had rotted through in several places, and the whole thing was basically a safety hazard. But that wasn't even the worst part. One day, while I was weeding near it, I noticed a wasp nest had formed inside one of the rotted sections. I tried telling my grandfather about the wasp nest in the sandbox and suggested we should do something about it before someone got hurt. He just continued pruning his roses without even looking at me, dismissing my concerns about the old sandbox and telling me to stop trying to find problems where there weren't any. A week later, I tried again. I mentioned that the wasp nest was getting bigger and suggested calling an exterminator. He just waved his hand dismissively, bragging about how he'd been dealing with wasps longer than I'd been alive and insisted they would move on their own. This went on for almost a month. Every time I brought it up, he'd either talk over me, ignore me completely, or tell me I was being dramatic. My grandmother even tried to back me up once. She started to suggest that maybe they should listen to me, but my grandfather cut her off mid-sentence, insisting he knew what he was doing and complaining about how kids nowadays think everything is dangerous. Then came the day of the incident. It was a hot afternoon, and I was helping him plant some new bushes. He was walking backward while lecturing me about the proper way to dig a hole, because apparently I've been doing it wrong for the past 3 years when it happened. I tried to warn him about watching out for the sandbox, but before I could finish my warning, he had already stepped right onto the rotted wood. The boards gave way immediately under his weight, and he fell straight through, right into the wasp nest. What followed was pure chaos. He came bursting out of that sandbox like a rocket, covered in angry wasps. He was running around the yard, swatting at them and screaming expletives I definitely wasn't supposed to hear. My grandmother came running out with a blanket to help him, while I called emergency services. Between swats, my grandfather was frantically yelling for someone to get the wasps off him. The emergency medical technicians arrived pretty quickly. By their count, he'd been stung 27 times. Thankfully, he wasn't allergic, but he did spend the rest of the day in the hospital under observation, covered in anti-sting cream and looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with a balloon. The next day, while he was recovering, I overheard him talking to my grandmother in the kitchen. He quietly admitted that maybe he should have listened about the wasp nest. My grandmother responded with a sarcastic, "You think?" From the other room, I couldn't resist asking loudly if I hadn't quite heard what he'd said. For once, he didn't have anything to say back. The sandbox was removed that weekend, and surprisingly, he started paying a bit more attention when I spoke up about potential problems around the garden. Though he'd never admit it out loud, I think getting attacked by a swarm of wasps taught him that sometimes, just sometimes, younger people might actually know what they're talking about. My wife and I had been planning our 5th anniversary dinner for weeks. We both work in healthcare. I'm a paramedic and she's a nurse, so getting our schedules aligned for special occasions is always a challenge. When we finally managed to get the same evening off, we were beyond excited. We chose this upscale steakhouse downtown that we've been saving up for. It's one of those places where you need to make reservations months in advance, and the menus don't even show the prices. My wife had been eyeing their famous tomahawk steak ever since her colleague mentioned it, and I wanted to make her dream come true. The evening started perfectly. We were seated at a cozy corner table, soft lighting, amazing ambiance, everything you'd want for a romantic dinner. Our waiter was super attentive, and when he brought out our tomahawk steak to share, it looked absolutely magnificent. The presentation was stunning, with the bone expertly cleaned and the meat cooked to perfection. We had just started cutting into it when this woman walking past our table suddenly stopped. She was wearing what looked like a handmade shirt with "Meat is Murder" written in green paint, and she was carrying a reusable shopping bag full of vegetables. She dramatically gasped and started berating us about how we dared to eat a poor animal. When I asked her what she meant, she launched into a speech about how many innocent creatures die every day because of people like us. I tried to ignore her, but before I could even respond properly, she reached over and knocked our plate off the table. Our perfect anniversary steak went crashing to the floor. The entire restaurant went silent. I demanded to know what was wrong with her. She just smugly declared that she was saving lives and accused us of contributing to mass murder. My wife tried to politely ask her to leave us alone, explaining that it was our anniversary dinner. But instead of backing off, Karen just started pulling vegetables out of her bag, insisting that we should eat what she called real food instead. She started waving a bunch of broccoli in my face. I couldn't help but laugh at how ridiculous the situation was. When I pointed out that she had just ruined a $200 steak and questioned if she really thought I would eat her bagged broccoli, she got even more worked up. She started preaching about the power of plants and claimed that her broccoli had more nutrition than what she called our dead animal. That's when things got really crazy. She literally lunged at me, trying to shove the broccoli into my mouth. I pushed my chair back, but she was surprisingly quick. Before I knew what was happening, my wife had jumped up from her seat, grabbed Karen by her hair, and yanked her away from me. When my wife told her to get her hands off me, Karen started screaming about being assaulted, specifically yelling that a meat-eater's wife was attacking her. The restaurant's security guards came running. Two of them had to pry Karen away while she kept screaming about animal rights and trying to throw more vegetables at us. The whole time she was ranting about pressing charges against my wife for what she called defending a murderer. When the police arrived, they told her she was under arrest for assault and destruction of property. She started protesting loudly, claiming they couldn't arrest her because she was protecting innocent lives. The police weren't impressed by her arguments. They arrested her as she continued screaming about how we were all complicit in such crime. The restaurant manager was incredibly apologetic. They not only replaced our steak with an even bigger one, but comped our entire meal and gave us a gift card for our next visit. We ended up having a memorable anniversary dinner after all, though probably not in the way we had originally planned. We later found out that Karen was sentenced to 6 months probation, ordered to pay restitution for the damaged meal, and had to attend anger management classes. The judge also specifically ordered her to stay at least 100 feet away from any steakhouse in the city. My wife and I still eat at that restaurant regularly. The staff always greets us as the couple who took down the broccoli lady. While I was searching for a new job, my cousin, a chef, told me his restaurant was hiring servers. So I ended up working evening shifts at a small Italian place downtown. The restaurant itself was pretty decent. Good food, fair prices, and generally nice customers. But there was one issue that made every shift feel like walking through a minefield. The constant stream of people asking for free food. When I say constant, I mean it. We get up to 20 people per day coming in, asking for handouts. Keep in mind we were only open from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m., so you can do the math on how frequently this happened. Some would be polite about it, but others, well, let's just say they had a different approach. One evening I was manning the host station when a man walked in. He immediately demanded food, saying he was hungry. I apologetically explained that we couldn't give out free food. He became angry, accusing us of being selfish and claiming he had seen food being wasted in the restaurant. I tried to explain that we carefully managed our inventory, but he wouldn't listen. He kept arguing until my shift supervisor had to come over and threaten to call the police for trespassing. It wasn't the first time we'd had to do this, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The next day, a woman came in with a similar demand. She claimed she needed food because her kids hadn't eaten all day. When I apologetically told her we couldn't provide free food, she called us heartless and questioned how we could sleep at night knowing children were going hungry. She then proceeded to sit in our waiting area, refusing to leave and making a scene that made several customers uncomfortable. After a rough week of these encounters, I decided to bring it up with the restaurant owner during our monthly staff meeting. I explained how these situations were becoming more frequent and sometimes aggressive, affecting both our work environment and our customers' experience. The owner just sat there listening with an amused expression. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and casually suggested, as if sharing an old family recipe, that we should just tell them we only had vegan dishes to offer. He said this usually deterred them. The entire staff looked at each other confused. It seemed too simple, almost silly, but we were desperate enough to try anything. The very next day I got to test this strategy. A man walked in demanding food. I told him I understood but explained that the only free items we could offer were steamed broccoli and carrots with tempeh. He asked what tempeh was, clearly confused. I explained it was a fermented soybean product, emphasizing how healthy and protein-rich it was, and asked if he'd like some. He angrily responded that he wasn't going to eat rabbit food and called us useless before storming out. I stood there, amazed at how well it had worked. Over the next few weeks, we continued using this approach. Every time someone came in asking for free food, we'd offer them our special vegan menu. The reactions were pretty consistent. One memorable encounter was with a Karen who demanded real food when I mentioned our vegan options. When I repeated that our only free options were plant-based and offered her steamed vegetables and tempeh, she asked if I thought she looked like a rabbit. She demanded to speak to the manager, and when I told her the manager would say the same thing, she threatened to report us for discrimination before leaving in a huff, never to return. The transformation was remarkable. Within a month, the number of people asking for free food dropped from 20 per day to less than 6 per week. Sure, we still had to deal with people cursing us out when we offered them steamed vegetables, but they'd leave quickly and never come back. It was a small price to pay for the peace and order it brought to our shifts. The owner's simple solution had worked better than any security measure or strict policy we could have implemented. Instead of constant confrontations and threats of calling the police, we now had a peaceful way to handle these situations. The funny thing is, we actually did have vegan options on our regular menu. Quite good ones, in fact, but something about offering only steamed vegetables seemed to do the trick. What made it even better was that the few people who were genuinely in desperate need of food would actually accept the vegan option. We'd end up giving them something more substantial, as they proved they were truly hungry rather than just trying to take advantage of us. One evening, as I was closing up, the owner came by and asked how the vegan strategy was working out. I told him it was like magic, and that I couldn't believe something so simple could be so effective. He wisely pointed out that sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones, explaining that people who demand things for free often want the best of what you have. By offering them something they perceive as less desirable, they'll walk away on their own. He was right. It wasn't about the food at all. It was about expectations and entitlement. By offering something that didn't meet their expectations, we changed the dynamic completely. I've been in the aerospace industry for a while, starting as a junior engineer and working my way up to project lead. I work for one of the biggest companies in the field, and overall, it's been a great job. We design and build parts for commercial and military aircraft, so the work is both interesting and challenging. Everything was going smoothly until about 6 months ago when our division got a new senior executive vice president. This guy came from some Silicon Valley tech company with grand ideas about revolutionizing corporate culture and maximizing productivity. From day one, he made it clear he was going to shake things up. I should mention that our team has always been incredibly efficient. We consistently met deadlines, our quality control was impeccable, and we had an excellent track record of innovation. Our previous management understood that creative work doesn't always fit into neat little boxes of time. Some days I come in at 8:30 a.m. because I had been working late the night before finishing simulations. Other days, my co-worker from the testing department would arrive at 8:45 a.m. because she had been running stress tests until 7 p.m. It was never an issue because we all got our work done, and done well. Then came that Tuesday morning. I was walking into the building at 8:10 a.m., having stayed until 6:30 p.m. the previous evening to complete a crucial project report. The new senior executive vice president was standing at the entrance. He immediately started berating me about being late, stating that work hours were from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour for lunch. When I tried to explain that I had stayed late the previous day to finish an important report, he cut me off and demanded my employee ID. Before I could even respond, my co-worker from the testing department arrived, and he started in on her too. He ranted about how we were examples of everything wrong with the company and refused to listen to any explanations. He just ordered us to get to our desks. We walked in, exchanging looks. Throughout the morning, we could hear similar confrontations at the entrance. Then around 10 a.m., the building-wide PA system crackled to life. The senior executive vice president made an announcement to the entire building, reminding everyone that working hours were strictly 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour for lunch. He warned that late arrivals would be documented and that this policy was non-negotiable. The announcement created quite a buzz around the office. Many of us had flexible arrangements that allowed us to manage our time effectively while meeting all our responsibilities. This rigid enforcement seemed like a step backward. At 4 p.m., we received an email about a mandatory staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the main conference room, and the senior executive vice president spent the next 45 minutes lecturing us about punctuality, discipline, and corporate standards. As the clock struck 5 p.m., something beautiful happened. Without any prior coordination, every single person except our immediate manager stood up and started packing their things. The senior executive vice president was in the middle of explaining his new performance matrix when the first person reached the door. He demanded to know where everyone thought they were going, insisting the meeting wasn't over. Our engineering team lead responded by simply repeating his own words back to him, reminding him that the job was 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour for lunch. One by one, we filed out, each of us maintaining perfect poker faces. Some of my co-workers even started humming the same tune he had used during his morning PA announcement. The senior executive VP's face turned really red as he watched his audience disappear. My co-worker from the testing department even threw in a cheerful goodbye, telling him she'd see him tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. The next day, there was a new email in our inboxes. All staff meetings would now be held at 3 p.m. No mention was made of the previous day's exodus, but we all noticed that the senior executive vice president stopped hanging around the entrance in the mornings. A week later, I arrived at 8:20 a.m. after staying late to run simulations. Nobody said a word. The following month, my co-worker from testing came in at 8:15 a.m. after a lengthy equipment calibration session. Again, silence. These days, the senior executive VP still talks about corporate discipline in his quarterly presentations, but he's learned to pick his battles. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.